Hello, I'm Ed Fuquay, young adult librarian extraordinaire here at Woonsocket Harris Public Library.
And I'm Michaela, human being here at Woonsocket Harris Public Library.
We're here to talk more about Dickens, and this week it's Oliver Twist.
Oliver Twist, the story of the poor orphan boy where things go from bad to worse.
Yeah, don't think about it as a story of a poor orphan boy. Think of it as a story about murderers, prostitutes, pickpockets, and drunks, which is what it mostly is about.
It is mostly about those colorful characters throughout London.
Absolutely. It was Dickens' second novel. In fact, he serialized it like he did a lot of his stuff, and he actually started the first chapters of Oliver Twist while he was still finishing Pickwick Papers.
Oh, really?
And Pickwick Papers is really relatively lighthearted, full of short vignettes. So this was his first, really solid novel, and it is so much darker than Pickwick. This is when Dickens became Dickens, was with Oliver Twist.
This novel is very, very dark, which is so strange, especially I don't know, through the lens of somebody who's read more modern works.
Yeah.
Because the main character is a child, and these incredibly dark, twisted
all these
things.
Horrible things happen to him, and that would eventually become a whole genre of its own, the poor orphan stories. But Dickens was ahead of his time in that.
Oh, absolutely. I know he drew a lot of what happened in this novel from real life events and his own life.
Yeah.
As well as this was considered a very strong commentary at the time it was published, because there was something called the Poor Laws in effect in England, where basically if you were poor, you had no rights. You weren't a citizen. You were just kind of assigned to a workhouse, and you worked until you died.
Yeah, you were in Oliver Twist, the orphan, is literally born in a workhouse.
Yes.
So he's condemned to work himself to death from the time he was born.
Well, he's a baby, so they keep him on the baby farm.
He's on the baby farm.
The baby farm, which just, if those words don't scream call child services, I don't know what does.
I know. So he's at the workhouse, and there is a clue to Oliver's parentage, but it's taken away early in the book.
Immediately.
So he grows up and has no idea who he is or where he comes from. He goes to the workhouse under the control of the odious Mr. Bumble and his wife.
Mr. Bumble, yes.
They're horrible, horrible people. They're abused, they're starved, they're literally worked to death, basically.
Yeah, these poor children, they're all, incredibly just emaciated, worked to death, to the point where, do we want to get right into the plot? Because
we should do the plot first, and then go back.
One day, Oliver and some of the other orphan boys that are working in this horrible workhouse factory, which they were, I forget what it's called, but it's like Wacom or something like that. It's these fibers that are basically bound together with tar, and they're used as insulation.
Yeah.
So these little children have to pull these threads through full of tar all day long.
And it tears their fingers to pieces.
It tears their fingers to pieces. So they draw lots one day, so draw straws to see who will ask Mr. Bumble for more food. And that's where the most famous line, I think, in this entire novel is the, "Please, sir, may I have some more?" And of course, not only is Oliver, no, you cannot have more. Since he did that, basically the people who run this workhouse, this board of well-fed, people who are running this just basically child slave institute, they advertise Oliver, somebody take him on as apprentice, will give you £5. He very nearly falls into the hands of this very wicked chimney sweep who works his boys to even harder than they're worked in the poorhouse. But a stroke of luck happens. He's taken in by Mr. Sowerby, who is a very kindly undertaker. Oliver is brought in to be a child mourner.
Yes, a professional mourner. His
job is to cry at the funeral of children, which, if that's not a...
There's enough of them that he's never want for employment.
There is another boy in the employ of Mr. Sowerby. His name is Noah, and he is awful. Noah one day, of course, insults Oliver's dead mother and causes a fight to occur between the two of them. Noah, being much older and bigger and stronger than Oliver, kind of just beats him to a pulp. He also gets Mrs. Sowerby, Mr. Sowerby's wife, on his side, and she helps beat Oliver.
Of course,
And of course, when Mr. Sowerby gets home, his wife persuades him that Oliver has done something terrible, and he then beats poor Oliver, who has been beat down by, I think Mr. Sowerby's also with another grown man who also beats Oliver. So he's been beat down by 3 adults and 1 large child. Having undergone this incredibly traumatic experience, he decides he's going to run away. He's going to run away to London. He's very, very weak. He's very hungry. He's tired. He's been beaten, bruised.
Yeah, he's 70 miles from London.
He's 70 miles from London. And he comes across, 2 other boys, one by the name of Jack Dawkins, who introduces himself as the great nickname, the best nickname, the Artful Dodger, and Charlie. So we've got the Artful Dodger and Charlie
Bates,
who say that they will bring Oliver they know somebody who will feed him, clothe him, and put a roof over his head. He's a kindly friend of theirs who takes care of them as well. So they bring him to the underground hideout of Fagin. Fagin, who is essentially running a ring of child pickpockets. He trains Oliver to become a pickpocket, although Oliver just thinks it's a weird game. He likes to play with the boys.
He's suspicious of them, but he never seems to fully grasp that they're crooks.
It's sweet, gentle, innocent naivety.
Yeah.
But yes, so Oliver is trained to be a pickpocket without him knowing. Fagin even keeps him until Oliver can successfully pickpocket every single item out of Fagin's coat. Yeah. After he does that, Oliver receives a shilling. He still doesn't understand that he's training him for a reason.
Yeah.
But anyway, Fagin says, yes, Oliver, you have been trained. Time to go out with the other boys and go make handkerchiefs.
Yes.
So they're going to go rob people on the street. So the boys target a wealthy gentleman named Mr. Brownlee. Now, Mr. Brownlee, I believe it is the Artful Dodger who steals his handkerchief.
The Dodger
does
it. Yeah.
The Dodger does it. And then him and Charlie run away, leaving Oliver kind of standing there, slack-jawed.
Completely stunned by what just happened.
Because a theft has taken place. Who could have foreseen? However, when he turns, Mr. Brownlee, of course, thinks Oliver is the one who must have taken his handkerchief and chases him through the streets of London.
As soon as he starts running, Dodger and Charlie both start shouting, "Stop, police!"
Yep. And Oliver is, of course, captured and taken before a magistrate, and now he is going to go to jail. It's absolute. He's going to go to jail.
Yeah,
luckily,
within like an hour or two after arriving in prison, he's already sent before a judge to be sentenced.
Oh, absolutely.
We'll talk about swift justice. And again, having worked in the courts, this is the kind of thing Dickens must have seen every day.
Oh, absolutely. So anyway, poor little Oliver. Luckily, a bookseller who was nearby the scene of the crime saw everything happened and testifies on Oliver's behalf, saying that no. A different boy took the handkerchief. Poor Oliver was just standing there, wrong place, wrong time. Mr. Brownlee feels so terrible about what has occurred. He says, no, I will take in this poor boy who is clearly dirty, malnourished, not very well dressed, definitely just prime street urchin. So he decides he'll take him in. It'll be his good deed. He almost sentenced this poor child to an unjust life locked up. So he takes him home, and of course, with Dickens, everything is tied together. So Mr. Brownlee kind of thinks to himself, wow, this kid, after he's been given a bath and some decent clothes, kind of looks like this portrait of one of my friend's wives from a while ago. I'll think nothing of it, though.
Yeah. As a Victorian novel, there are certain flaws that modern artists have a hard time to get through. Like, twice, Oliver is accused of stealing something he didn't really steal. Each time he is captured, and each time he winds up in the hands of a benefactor who showers him with gifts that he has a close personal relationship to that he just doesn't know about yet.
Yes.
It happens twice.
Twice. We're getting to the second part. The second time is very, very close. So of course, you've said it happens again. Fagin, upon learning that Oliver is now kind of living in the lap of luxury, goes, oh, no, he's going to tell the authorities about our underground lair where we stay. So he employs the help of not just the Artful Dodger and Charlie, but a man named Bill Sykes, who is terribly wicked and awful, and his girlfriend, Nancy. We'll talk about Nancy a lot more later.
I picked Bill Sykes as one of my villains. He's
absolutely
such a great black-hearted villain.
He's awful. He's absolutely terrible. He is bad as bad can be. But anywho, this group is sent to go kidnap Oliver and bring him back because they're afraid that he is going to basically tell everybody about their dirty dealings, secret plans, and secret hideout. So of course they go and they kidnap Oliver. They bring him back. They threaten him. They, they do what they do. Nancy is the only one who's kind of gentle towards Oliver, feels any sort of remorse for taking him out of a good situation. She's kind of the one that talks to Oliver, gains his trust a little bit. And of course, now that they have him back, they need to make sure that they've got dirt on him that they can hold against him to keep him in line. So they force him to go rob a house. Of course, he does not want to rob the house, so they, of course, just throw him through the window.
Basically, yeah.
That's essentially what happens. They throw him through a window, and in the process of Oliver, of course, he's been chucked in a window, gracelessly attempting to rob this house. This poor child is shot by one of the servants and left in a ditch by the Artful Dodger and Bill Sykes. Yeah, just leave him in a ditch. He's fine.
He'll be fine. Yeah, he always bounces back. That's our Oliver.
Yeah, this child's bleeding out. So the next morning, of course, Oliver wakes up because, of course, he's not dead. It would be a much shorter book. He goes to the house that he robbed the night before. Of course, is very apologetic, explains what happened. He's been shot, and he is then taken in by the people who he was trying to rob.
The very people he was trying to rob have taken him in now, and he's lying on, fresh cotton sheets and cleaned up and everything.
Rose and her caretaker, her aunt, Mrs. Mailey. Mrs. Mailey. Yeah. It's been a minute. So it's Rose and her aunt, Mrs. Mailey, and they take care of Oliver for quite a period of time because I believe Mr. Brownlee has gone to the East Indies for business. So
he has given up on him temporarily. He'll be back.
Yeah, he'll be back. So he is now being taken care of by these really lovely, wonderful people. Of course, now we cut to the seedy underbelly of London. Yes, of course, there is an evil plan underfoot put in place by Fagin and a gentleman we only know as Mr. Monks.
Yes, Mr. Monks, who shows up, who definitely he's in some ways the main villain of the piece, so he doesn't appear in the book that much.
He's definitely the puppet master pulling the strings. He drives
a lot of the action, yeah.
Definitely. Although some people are just bad and terrible in general.
Yeah.
It's found out that Fagin and Mr. Monks have been working together. Oliver has actually been placed in the pathway of Fagin by Mr. Monks wanting Oliver to basically become a pickpocket. This grown man, really wants to destroy the life and reputation of this little boy. Mr. Monks, of course, he's definitely doing something seedy, shady. There's some underhanded dealings going on. It is later revealed that Mr. Monks is actually the older half-brother of Oliver. Yep. He's trying to ruin Oliver's life so he can keep the entirety of his father's inheritance, which of course half rightfully belongs to Oliver.
The irony of it is Oliver has absolutely no clue he's due to inherit anything, so he never goes looking for his family, and therefore has almost zero chance of ever challenging Monk for the inheritance.
In fact, Monk's trying to being so paranoid and thinking that Oliver is going to come after this money winds up in the end being a self-fulfilling prophecy. If he had just let Oliver live his life, none of this would have happened. So yes, Monks his actual name is Edward. He is Oliver's half-brother. Oliver's father was a wealthy man. He was in a miserable first marriage that produced Edward, and then was separated from Edward's mother. He then met this very beautiful younger girl. Her name was Agnes. That is Oliver's mother. Mm-hmm. Agnes also had a younger sibling who was about a toddler at the time that Oliver's father met her. So let's go back now. So Nancy, the only person who is really sympathetic at all towards Oliver, she's a really good character. She's a girl in a bad situation. Her boyfriend is really abusive and terrible, and she gets wrapped up into these really terrible things, and it really does try to at least do the right thing. In the end, she tries to do the right thing. She lets Mr.
One of the chapters is actually called, it was Nancy attempts to help Oliver but fails.
Yeah. She wants to let, of course, now Fagin is on her tail. She overhears this whole conversation
she knows
about Oliver's origin, and she wants to tell Mr. Brownlee. So, of course, she's, on a mission. She's going to do it. She's going to help poor little Oliver. She's going to let him know. He's going to have tons of money. It's going to be great. of course, Fagin is terrible and Fagin is awful, and
she has drugged Sykes with laudanum so she could sneak out.
But because Fagin, he will not allow her to go on her evening walk.
Will not allow her to leave, go anywhere without him. But Fagin, of course, deduces what's going on.
Yeah, Fagin definitely puts two and two together. And I believe he follows her. This is the part of the novel that it's been a minute.
He deduces what happened.
Yeah, he deduces what happened. I believe she goes to speak to Mr. Brownlee about what has happened, as that is the person who was taking care of Oliver and is his official guardian.
Yeah.
He is officially a ward of Mr. Brownlee, to tell him of what she's learned. And of course, that portrait, all along it was Mr. Brownlee's good friend who fell in love with Agnes. And yes, of course, I have this deep, profound connection to Oliver and have all along. Of course. And she lets Brownlee know, and now kind of the jig is up.
Yeah.
The jig is up. So of course Fagin lets Sykes know, and Sykes, in one of the most brutal scenes in the novel, it's absolutely terrible.
Yeah.
Beats her to death with a pistol.
Yeah.
Absolutely goes crazy and beats her to death with a pistol. Bill Sykes is, of course, now on the run because he has murdered his girlfriend.
Yeah. Dickens says of all the horrors committed in that part of London, this was the worst. It's literally the worst murder anyone has ever seen.
I don't like it.
Dickens was such a great writer. Sykes is on the run. Everywhere he goes, he wanders into a bar and hears people talking about the murder. Have you heard what happened to Nancy?
Even on the countryside, he goes all the way.
He leaves London and goes into the countryside, and they're still talking about it.
To the point where he's very, very panicked. So he decides, after a while of running, everybody knows what has happened, and he eventually comes back to London. He needs some money. He needs to get away. He needs to
He's cut of Fagin's stash.
He needs to get away. He needs to get some money so he can leave the country where nobody knows who he is. And in the process of trying to steal some money, falls off of a roof and accidentally hangs himself, which is karmic justice.
Yeah.
To the extreme.
The trouble.
Yeah.
That's before he tries to drown his dog for barking too loudly and drawing the crowd. And, so he has no redeeming virtues whatsoever.
Not even a little bit. Not even a little bit. God, I hate him. He's so awful. I love him. But yes, so of course Oliver eventually finds out the truth. Finds out that Monks is really his brother Edward, that he is due a pretty large inheritance. Finds out that Edward's mother, on the day that their father died, burned the will.
Yeah. Destroyed the will, the only thing that could prove that Oliver was supposed to inherit,
And then, even after all this has come to pass, now Oliver is going to have this large inheritance. Mr. Brownlee even still urges Oliver to still share his inheritance with his brother Edward. It's the right thing to do.
They do, they split it.
So, Oliver stays good, stays virtuous. He splits that inheritance with his half-brother. Of course, the half-brother then goes to the Americas, gambles it all away, and dies in a prison.
Yeah.
Because, when you're wicked, you're wicked. You can't help it. Even if you have money, you're still going to be wicked. Oliver lives the rest of his days in relative comfort.
He does. He has a very good life, but unfortunately, the police have swept in, and all of his old friends from the streets do not fare nearly as well.
No.
Yes, Artful Dodger is arrested, and he's hauled before the magistrate, and they actually, because Fagin is scared to go himself, he wouldn't go near the officers of the law, but he actually gets someone to go in and observe the proceedings so he can report back on how the Dodger acted. And of course, Dodger attempted to make a circus out of the entire thing. At one point, when he's brought before the magistrate, he says, "Let's make this quick, shall we? I have a business meeting this afternoon. It is unprofessional to be late."
I love the Artful Dodger.
He's deported to Australia, unfortunately, for his wit. He's not hanged.
He's not hanged, which... if only Fagin fared better.
Unfortunately, Fagin is hanged. He winds up having a complete mental collapse in prison, and Oliver goes to see him, and there's just nothing left of the old Fagin.
No.
And Monks had hidden some papers in Fagin's place for safekeeping. And so he's in one of his lucid moments, he tells Oliver, the loose brick in the chimney, to find the papers that Monks has left behind.
It's his identification papers for his his true last name, everything. It's Oliver's identity. And he goes and he finds those. And then one character, Noah, who was in the novel earlier as the person who was, also working for the Undertaker who took Oliver in, he eventually, of course, falls out with the Undertaker and kind of starts rolling with Fagin's gang. Since he helps the police, Noah does wind up helping the police. He is granted immunity in the trial and then himself becomes a police officer. So he at least gets a kind of happy ending.
Yeah.
But it's very Dickens.
Yeah, the Bumbles wind up being fired when this whole story comes out.
Oh, yeah.
And they don't have any money, so they wind up in a very poor house that they were running.
The debtor's prison.
The debtor's prison, yeah. So that was an ironic end for them as well. And Charlie Bates, the other member of Fagin's team that actually has a name, learns of an important lesson from all his friends being hanged and deported, and winds up going on the straight and narrow and becoming a sheep farmer.
There's worse fates than sheep farmer.
So this is a really popular book. It's been in print since the day it came out. It's never gone out of print. It's been filmed dozens of times. And it's obvious reading the book that Dickens had no idea that Artful Dodger and Fagin would be the most popular characters.
Well, they're so snarky and funny. They have the best dialogue in the whole book.
Oh, it's brilliant dialogue. Fagin has the joie de vivre. He just loves what he does. Even though what he does is completely wrong and absolutely immoral. Literally teaching innocent kids to steal is what he does for a living. But somehow you still like them.
Yeah.
Dickens liked to play to his audience, and I think he would have given the two characters more screen time if he'd really known they were going to be the stars of the book. Because frankly, the good people in the book, Mr. Brownlee and the Mayleys, are really dull.
Yeah.
They're completely
oh my God.
dishwater dull. The chapters drag to a complete halt whenever they're on screen.
Yeah, it's like, oh, good, Oliver surrounded by good people.
Yeah.
Yay. And it's less colorful.
On some level, Dickens, and one of the reasons why Dickens is that the author himself is like a character in the book. He's telling you the story, and his personal opinions color everything that happens. I love chapter headings that tell you way too much.
Yeah.
I do a parody of that sometimes in my own writing. So there's a chapter in Oliver Twist which says, a very short chapter which may appear to be of no importance but should be read anyway. That's so Dickens. He's right, it's a dull chapter, but important things do happen. We learn things in that chapter.
Information dump. Welcome to the information dump.
When the book came out, it was a huge bestseller. It was the talk of England. Everybody read it or had heard about it at least. It started a whole genre of novels. Queen Victoria, big fan. Although it didn't have the same impact on everyone, since Victoria apparently asked her prime minister at the time if he had read it, and his response was, I don't wish to know about thieves and criminals in real life, and I certainly don't want to encounter them in fiction. So it could have been why the Prime Minister wasn't really into the whole social reform bit, but he has replaced it a few years anyway. And the scene, well, first of all, Dickens is very evocative in describing things. And she brings London to life. London is a beautiful city, but also a horrible city. As a reporter, these are the streets that he walked on. He was very good friends with a guy named Henry Mayhew. Mayhew wrote a book called London Labour and London Poor. It's still in print from Dover. I highly recommend it if you're interested in the Victorian era. He was a guy who went out and just interviewed thieves and prostitutes and junkies and things, and just interviewed, so who are you, where'd you come, how'd you get here, and that kind of thing. And Victorians were shocked and horrified to discover that these people who led such horrific lives were actual human beings with hopes and dreams that had perfectly ordinary births and childhoods, rather than symbols of moral turpitude, which is how they're seen in Victorian England. No, they're actual human beings.
Yeah, it's the humanization of the poor. Nobody is born and is immediately destined to be a thief. It's you're a victim of circumstance.
Yeah, that's very much what Dickens is saying. And so bringing these characters to life and giving them all names and personalities, Dickens did so much to help people see the poor as being not just some anonymous blob out there somewhere, but actual human beings struggling to survive under very difficult circumstances. And no one struggled to survive more than poor Nancy.
Yeah.
She's a great character. She's compassionate. She's had an extraordinarily hard life. The scene that really kind of sent a chill down my spine was she's fighting with Fagin over Oliver's like destiny at one point. And she says, and I was at it when I was younger than him, and haven't I been doing this for 12 long years? And I thought, hold on. You started when you were younger than Oliver. So you were, what, 5 or 6 years old when you were put out of the streets? And you were doing it for 12 years, so that means you're 17 or 18?
Yeah, she's young. She's under 20.
Dickens is writing about a teenage girl.
Yeah.
She's had such a hard life. She has that old soul quality about her. That's because she's been through so much physical and mental abuse.
Yeah, and she sees the same for Oliver, and that's why she identifies with him so much. She wants to save one more child from Oliver this terrible fate.
Yeah, she wants to save Oliver from the fate the way she couldn't save herself. And when she's given a chance, the Maylies offer to like give her money to travel abroad, to start a new life anywhere she wants. And she basically says, I can't. Yeah. It's too late for me. She believes her destiny is set in stone, and I think she believes that Bill Sykes will just kill her one day, as indeed he does.
Yeah, she knows that that's her fate. That's why she drugs him so she can get out. Even she knows that she's probably signing her own death warrant. She knows
she's doomed. Yeah, she's so heroic and suffers so horribly. Victorians were shocked by the violence in that scene. These days, this old hat, a woman beaten to death, unfortunately, sadly. Victorians had never read that kind of thing before in popular fiction. And there was a hue and cry of moral outrage about the level of violence in the book. And Dickens pointed out that all this comes from real life. The murder of Nancy was inspired by the murder of Eliza Grimwood, a prostitute who was killed by her pimp.
Yep.
And she was beaten so horrifically that several years later, when the first of the Ripper murders occurred, one reporter said this is the worst crime that London has seen since the Grimwood murder.
Yeah.
And also, Fagin famously was based on an actual fence, Isaac Solomon, who did most of the things in real life that Fagin did in fiction. He's just a more glamorized, exaggerated version of a very real person. So the criminals are definitely the most interesting people by far. And it's impossible not to fall into the romanticism of their lifestyle, even though they all live horrible lives.
Yeah, no, none of it's good. They're always dirty and, in squalor. I don't know. I can't see it being romanticized, although they are the most colorful and they seem to have the most fun.
Well, I first encountered Oliver when I was like 8 or 9 years old, when the musical was in theaters. The musical was a huge hit at the time, and my school sent us out as a field trip because it was educational, because it was Dickens. It's a great musical, and it does capture most of the high points of the book. They leave out monks and they leave out the Maylies, really. The good people are all condensed to Brownlee.
Yeah.
And monks isn't really necessary for the plot, honestly. You don't need monks.
No, you don't. It almost feels like a completely separate story that was kind of just chipped on at the end. Because even if Oliver at the end of all of this horribleness is just adopted by Brownlee, that's still a really good ending.
Yeah. And most importantly, modern day interpretations, they have to make the Dodger and Fagin more interesting.
Yeah.
Fagin does have a hard edge for them. He discovers that Dodger has let Oliver be arrested. He beats Dodger, And it's a sad scene. Fagin's like utter horror when he discovers what Sykes has done, even though it was Fagin who planted the idea in his head in the first place. He really didn't think it would go too far. Actors love playing Dickens characters.
Yeah.
Because there's so much to work with.
Oh, there's a ton of meat there.
I went in and I found a partial list of actors who played Fagin in movies or on stage, and that includes Lon Chaney in the silent version, Richard Dreyfuss, Tim Curry, Rowan Atkinson, and Jonathan Pryce, who narrates the audiobook from audible.com, and Ron Moody, who famously was nominated for but didn't win a Tony and an Oscar for playing that part.
Well, he's the king of thieves.
He's Fagin,
When who doesn't want to play that? He's a bad man. And he loves what he does.
Yeah. Again, I say the joie de vivre, the amount that he enjoys it, and the musical being a musical, of course, can capture those emotions really well. But it does come across even in Dickens' book.
Yeah.
I went out and read the book after seeing the movie, and Dickens is tough sledding when you're like 9 years old.
I was about the same age when I read it, and reading it and honestly, like experiencing these horrors and learning that, bad things can happen to kids my age.
Yeah, but also, I was looking at Dodger, who's only like 12, and I was like 8 or 9, that sense of freedom that he has. He's the king of London underworld.
Oh yeah, I used to think of like Dodger, you know, when I first read this, I was about the same age. I was like between 8 to 10. I used to like, I thought Dodger was like an adult. Yeah. You know, the way he talks, what he does.
He's only like 12 or 13, but he's wearing a men's coat, and he has to roll up the sleeves massively so you can see his hands, and a battered top hat that doesn't fit him.
Yeah.
He dresses like a gentleman in really old, torn up, clothing.
Yeah. Yeah, he does. I love the Artful Dodger.
Yeah, Dodger is a fantastic character, and so is Fagin. But the streets that he described, of course, don't exist anymore. This Bill Sykes scene where he's being chased through the streets, and the streets are covered in mud, and they really do that in the movie Oliver, the musical. They recreate that very well on the soundstage at Shepperton. And I discovered that was a very real street. There was a part of London where there was a tidal pool. Wherever the tides changed the Thames, the water would wash up. So the street was literally nothing but mud. You couldn't put cobblestones on it even if you wanted to. Yeah. It was ankle-deep mud all the time, and deeper than that when the tide was in. Yeah. And that's the muck that they're running through. The little slime and muck that coats everything comes from that.
And I'm sure it's being mixed with all the excrement being dumped.
The filth of the city, Yeah, he really points to the dark side of London. It's still romanticized, and yet he uses phrases like labyrinth of dark, narrow alleys and a maze of mean and dirty streets, leads to Bill Sykes' place. But he describes it so well that it's easy to see it in your head. And again, that was a very real neighborhood in his time. Supposedly, that neighborhood was torn down completely. Also, because it was nothing but mud, you couldn't put foundations for a house. Yeah. So any house that was more than one story would start to lean over. The houses were literally touching each other. Yeah. Which again, he describes that very well. The 1920s, it was all torn down, it was paved over, and it's now a trendy section of boutiques and coffee bars.
Of course it is.
But in the 20s, when they were demolishing the buildings, the little kids in the neighborhood told reporters, that's old Bill Sykes' house. Everybody who lives in that neighborhood identified the building that Dickens described. And it was supposedly, according to legend, it looked exactly as Dickens described until it was torn down.
That's awesome.
It had been empty for decades until it was finally torn down in the 20s.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's how real these characters are. Dickens was doing an amazing job. This was like his second novel and his first one to really have an impact. And it would go on to color everything that he wrote. It's a very straightforward novel. It's long, but it's full of action. Stuff happens all the time, except when they're talking too much. Again, even Dickens admits that. But there's something interesting or important happening in literally every chapter. And he also has a very straight plot. You don't have a lot of winding things that go off, like some of the other ones do, Great Expectations and so forth. Interweave other plot lines into the hero's story. Oliver has one plot line. If you follow it straight through from when he's born until when he finally achieves his destiny. Yeah.
No, and it's the bumps along the way.
Yeah.
That's all that's all the supporting cast is. Those supporting characters. They are the bumps along the way.
Yeah, it galvanized the people of Victorian London that read it. And it was definitely one of those books that goes down in history as changing the world, making people think differently about the world around them, which is really the goal of fiction.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a very important piece, and highly political for its time.
Fun.
It is fun.
Yeah, it's a very fun book. The humor in there, Dickens was really experimenting with his sense of humor.
It's rich personalities, and everyone has a distinctive voice, a distinctive way of speaking within the novel. This feels like Dickens finding his voice as a writer and just as somebody who writes really meaty, colorful characters. Every character is so distinctive in there that when you are reading it almost feels like, and I know they were written as serialized, entries to the paper.
Every chapter ends with a cliffhanger, basically.
But it is that sort of, this is a soap opera. This was the soap opera of the day.
Yeah. Yeah, it's easy to see why it was so popular and is still popular today.
Oh, absolutely.
They keep filming it again and again. The Broadway version has come and gone several times.
Yep.
The Rowan Atkinson one was just a couple of years ago, in fact.
Oh, yeah, and I'm sure they'll be doing another adaptation within the next few years.
Rod Moody kept playing Fagin until the day he died, and a reporter asked him about that. He said, it's the role of a lifetime. Why would I turn it down?
Yeah. But yeah, no, I'm sure they'll keep making adaptations of it. I mean, there are character archetypes in there that are copied in other novels.
Yeah, by far.
I mean, this is a work of art that has been referenced in thousands of others, not just TV shows, but other novels, movies. I know there's several like artworks devoted to Oliver Twist, short stories. Oh my goodness, the short stories that are based in the world of Oliver Twist are just amazing.
I counted at least 4 without even trying sequels, unofficial sequels.
And it's just because there are such colorful characters in there, and you have the low class, you've got the high class. There's a character in there that everyone can identify with, even if you just remember being a child and not fully understanding the world around you, the darkness of the world around you. Everyone can identify with Oliver.
Yeah, he's a very passive main character, which Dickens, that would be one of his trademarks. Things happen to Dickens' heroes. They don't do things themselves. But when you're surrounded by so many colorful characters who are doing things to the main character, then it works.
Well, yeah, it also lets you project yourself onto Oliver himself, and you experience all of these things. Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
You
completely do. Everyone has felt like that at some time or another. Maybe not, the really terrible things, but certainly the emotional impact of those things. And you read this book, and everything that happens, you are experiencing it as Oliver.
Yeah.
But wonderful novel. Highly recommend.
Fantastic novel. Yes, highly recommended. There's a really good companion piece to it, too, among the many sequels. Fagin the Jew by Will Eisner, which is a graphic novel where the entire story is retold from Fagin's point of view.
Yep.
Most of the movie versions don't end with Fagin being hanged because it's just too horrible to contemplate that. Almost everyone allows Fagin to escape in some way.
As awful as he is, he's so likable.
The audiences love him and they can't get enough of him. So he'll live on in our memories.
Yeah. It's like, it's better to just, instead of, his wicked ways being brought to an end, it's nice to imagine what he escapes and does terrible things for the rest of his life. But, I mean, what else is there to say about Charles Dickens' Oliver Twist?
Fantastic book.
Other than, it's awesome. If you haven't read it, read it at least once.
Yeah. All right, so until next time, this has been Book Talking. I've been Ed.
I've been Michaela.
We'll see you again, and be safe.
Be happy, be healthy. Bye.
Bye.